Portions of Aviation Highlights were made possible by a donation from Dynamic Recording Studio and by Rillo Associates, a full-service advertising and public relations agency. Hi, I'm Paul Pakusch, enjoying the last little bit of warm weather for this year. This is the October edition of Aviation Highlights, a monthly TV program about aviation in and around the Rochester area, which comes to you right here on Cable Channel 12. I had the chance to speak with somebody who does missionary work in Mexico, and in order to get into Mexico, he has to use light aircraft. The setting for this interview was in New York State's Letchworth Park. It's a scenic park with its many trees, the Genesee River winding through it, the High Gorge, and the Mount Morris Dam. Daniel Perkins does missionary work in the country of Mexico through UIM International. Because of poor ground travel conditions in many parts of Mexico, the only way to get into some of the communities is by air. He first explained the purpose of his organization.
Well, the basic purpose of it is to provide aviation transportation to missionaries in the country of Mexico, where by any other means there's no way to get there other than by foot or by air.
Okay, what are the missionaries doing in Mexico?
The missionaries at this time are doing church planting and evangelism work, strictly those two subjects, and have been involved in this for many, many years.
Can you describe how they operate?
Yes, what they do is we fly in for different mission organizations down there. Some of them are involved in Bible translation. Some of them are involved in church planting work. Others are involved in one-a-month ministries, such as taking some Mexican seminary students to the country of Mexico into these mountains and leaving them off at an airstrip and having them walk to another airstrip. In the meantime, they're doing evangelism and church planting work.
Okay. And what are you doing, basically what are you doing in New York?
Well, what I'm doing in New York is I'm visiting the different churches and individuals that I've known for quite a few years, and trying to enlist them into the possibility of helping support both our ministry and the aviation ministry. My wife and I and the children are up. We came back here with the intent of sharing our ministry and being able to provide the opportunity for people to give us support financially. We need prayer support, and we also need to bring out the ministry to people who have never seen an aviation type ministry, people that have never seen how aircraft could be used in a Christian service such as what I've just explained. And so it's a multilateral type of thing.
Can you describe some of your experiences flying them?
Well, I'm actually involved in the maintenance of the aircraft. I'm the aircraft mechanic, and some of the experiences we encounter are quite interesting. We find that in the country that we're working in the particular this particular part of the country, there's a lot of drug activity, and so we play a very finite balance on how we do the work and how we get into the villages and so on and so forth. Of course, we also have to realize that this region is very rugged. There are very few dirt airstrips, and those that are there are very rough airstrips. They're very rough to land and take off on. And the experiences in just landing and taking off on some of these, as they are one-way airships, is a story in itself. Sometimes as we land, or let's say that as we take off, we have to take off people off the aircraft before we take off so that the airplane can actually get off the ground, depending on, of course, the altitude, density altitude in which we're flying at that time. Some of the situations we encounter, the experiences are very funny. In fact, there's many people don't know that you can't buy bulk quantity fuel in Mexico. And so to be able to fly in this region, we have to fill our aircraft with fuel in probably one of the major cities and then fly back. And whenever we need an additional amount of fuel, what we have to do is download it, siphon it out of the aircraft into a large plastic container. And we basically have to have storage depots all over the mountains where we are flying at with avgas. And this situation we don't see to decline at all, because the Mexican government has limited the amount of fuel they'll sell to people flying in this region, down to just what you can put in the aircraft. Other situations we find ourselves in is the fact that a lot of the strips that we fly in are one-way airstrips. Simply there's just no other way to get in there except one way. So the decision has to be made upon approach, actually before final, whether or not you're going to land, because once you make that commitment to land, there's no way you're going to turn around. A lot of these strips are in valleys coming up the side of a mountain, and the commitment is made to land on that airstrip. You can't swing left or right. You either crash or you land. And so the pilots carry a very finite balance. Much of the load of the responsibility of the aircraft performing right is laid on the mechanics, of course. I have a big responsibility in the fact that we have a single engine aircraft. That's what we use in the Cessna 206 and a 185. And there's just no other way to do it other than using a single engine aircraft. And so everything has to be working right. And we have not had a major accident, and we do not expect to have one. And so it's a very finite situation.
How often do you have to abort a landing or even abort a mission because the pilot decides the landing just isn't going to work?
Well, it all depends. If we're on final to a one-way airstrip, there's no way to abort the landing. You land or you crash. In circumstances where we run into weather, our pilots may have to cancel one of the flying missions. Let's say they were going to go to 2 or 3 villages, and upon flying in this region, they run into several thunderstorms. They may decide to turn around and come back, and because they fly within that envelope of safety, and so they just turn around and come on back. As far as how many, I can't recall. I do know that during the summer times they have to make snap decisions like that all the time when the monsoon season comes in. The Aviation Service Center, right, and Flight Center is based in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay, do you just fly to Mexico or any other countries?
Well, we are, of course, open to service to anybody within UIM International. And so UIM International having service all the way up to Canada, and both the United States and Mexico also, we're open to service any one of the missionaries. At this time, our most active field is in the country of Mexico. And since we're based in Tucson, Arizona, and we have been servicing the missionaries in Mexico, then that's what we're doing at this time.
Okay. What's involved in flying to Mexico in general?
In general, every flight we have to land at the international border or in one of the international airports on the Mexican side. We have to clear customs. That term means that you have to go in, they inspect your aircraft, you have to file a flight plan, you list in the your place of destination and estimate time of arrival. You also have to get visas, which is a temporary entry permit for all passengers. You have to list the cargo you're taking and so on and so forth. and then you fly to wherever you are going to, and then upon return you have to land at the U.S. Customs and clear customs on the U.S. side, which means you have to do the same thing on the U.S. side. They check your passengers for to make sure they are U.S. citizens, check your cargo to make sure you're not bringing anything into the United States that's illegal, and of course then they allow you to fly home. So it's a complicated procedure, but it's something that we have to do. It's much better at this time than basing a plane in Mexico and not knowing whether or not we'll have the airplane next year or so. So it's the safest way at this time. Some of the airstrips in which we take off and land in, some of the airstrips are just straight up the side of a mountain, and upon the approach there's a little hill before the end of the airstrip. It's actually something that you would never think you could land an airplane on. Of course, some of the airstrips, I have several pictures of one particular airstrip called El Zapote. El Zapote means the big frog. And if you look at it, you probably would understand why you'd have to leap off of this thing to get off and leap on to get on. But it's up on the side of a hill, and I've taken several pictures on the approach of it, on the coming in for the approach before the final. And you see it cut out the side of the hill, and it just looks like something you would never land on. We're very careful as we land on this airstrip because both we have to take into consideration why we're going there and what we're taking there, and we have to limit our capacity in the aircraft. We need to have it as light as possible. Another airstrip is about 7,200 feet of elevation, and it actually goes around a corner on a mountain. And I've got pictures where you can see the bottom side and the top side, but you can't see the middle. And it actually makes a dog leg, and it's quite interesting. Actually, it's quite interesting taking off and landing on it without even seeing the pictures.
For the history portion of Aviation Highlights with Paul Roxin.
Another incident happened right here at the airport, and it was involved American Airlines. Once again, they had came out with a Stinson tri-motor, a low wing, and it was a pretty good airplane. It cruised about 130, 135 miles an hour. That plane took off from Rochester one morning, and we had high tension wires along the southwest boundary of the airport. Right over the high tension wires, all three engines quit. There were no passengers on board. That fellow put that airplane down in a field without putting a scratch on it. There was another paper in town besides the Gannett papers, and that was the Hearst paper, Journal American. And they had a contest every week. Whoever turned in the most exciting story would get a $20 reward. Well, when that plane went down, everybody ran to the telephone. Get that $20. That's like someone giving you $2,000 today. Well, I was about the fifth or sixth one to call in, report the accident. I didn't know about it. And about 4 days later, Jim Wilmot, who was the assistant airport manager, he and I were very close. We were always involved in deals. He said, "Hey, Paul, got a little problem here." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I was the first one to call in." And he said, "I work for the city, I work for the airport. If they ever find out that I did that," he said, "I might lose my job." He said, "Suppose I fix it that you were the first one to call on." He said, "All right," and we'll split it. So I got the credit for it. I got the $20 and gave Jim his $10. And Jim was one of the shrewdest entrepreneurs that I've ever known. And the pilot, not pilot, but one of the supervisors from American Airlines came in and claimed they picked up water in the gas here. That was not so, because there was another fellow, Dr. Light, who had a Belenka here, and an Air Force plane was in. They all three gassed from the same gas pit, the same gasoline, and none of them had any problem at all. So what happened was they did find water in the gas, but we picked up whether it had been in Newark or Albany or Syracuse, wherever the plane landed, or condensation, but It was a wonderful job of landing that disabled aircraft. And mechanics came from Buffalo. They removed the wings of the plane. They towed the fuselage back to the hangar. Some of the wings, a couple days later, flew the plane away. And Ray Harlan was one of the, once again, a very natural pilot. Learned to fly in 1927 on the old Jenny. His instructor was a fellow by the name of Cap Reddick, who was a colleague of Charles Lindbergh. The two, Reddick and Lindbergh, used to fly the Mail together. Ray started flying service in 1931. I happened to have been a passenger at that time. There's a picture of 1933, the same plane that Ray gave me a ride, and took up my buddy and I for $1. That will show you how bad the Depression was. That probably used 30 cents worth of gasoline and maybe had a 70-cent profit on the adventure. But Ray was a very benevolent person, a very shrewd operator, and he built his flying service into a large-scale operation. He and Jim Wormott joined forces in World War II. They built a very successful flying service down in Louisiana. In 1975, a testimonial dinner was given to Ray Harlan, which I happened to attend, and pilots came from all over the country in order to honor him. And this is a picture of taking Ray at that particular time. Ray had acquired one of the Navy fighter planes that was popular back in the mid-30s, and he used to put on air shows with that particular plane. The name escapes me. However, that plane can be seen today in the Smithsonian Institute. Ray donated it to them after he decided that he had enough of that. What you see here is one of the planes that was the bulwark of our U.S. Air Force back about 1930. It was a Curtiss. The designation I don't recall. It had a liquid-cooled Conqueror engine in there, in the plane, and it made a tremendous amount of noise when it took off, and you swore that plane was moving 250 miles an hour. And then you look up at the sky, and it was lumbering along maybe 80 miles an hour, 85 miles an hour. It did not last very long with the Air Force. It was superseded by other models.
On the first edition of Aviation Highlights, which ran in March of 1989, we did a story about WVOR's helicopter traffic reports. Here's an encore of that feature. Rush hour. Thousands of cars in the daily migration to and from a job. Traffic usually moves smoothly, but there are congested roadways, bad weather, accidents. Watching all of this from a high perch are two men in a helicopter.
WVOR 100. Just about 7:31. Let's check things out with Gary Trout. What's happening, buddy?
Thanks, Tony. We got a problem on 390 southbound 1st and Ridgeway Avenue. Captain Friendly of the Johnny Antonelli Firestone Courtesy Cruiser helping out there. Then out by Chili Avenue in the right lane, we've got a minor accident that's blocking the right lane. We have a backup on 390 southbound from the Weston interchange, headed out toward Chili, so expect some stop-and-go conditions there. And on the Clinton Avenue exit from 490 westbound into downtown Rochester, South Clinton Avenue, left lane, disabled vehicle, traffic slow coming in from the city route. Clinton Avenue South, headed up into the city, but the expressway exit part itself is okay. Can of worms heavily traveled right now. Use caution. And on the Veterans Bridge eastbound, an accident that has westbound travel on the Veterans Bridge back up to about the Clinton Avenue overpass on 104. Use caution on the way in. This is Gare the Air, the WVOR traffic copter.
Gare in the Air is Gary Chard, a former police officer who now works in financial planning.
We do about 7 scheduled reports every morning, and then we bring in reports as needed, as conditions will dictate. So I become an integral part of the morning show on VOR to provide traffic information, regular updates to our commuters who are listening on their way into work.
The pilot flying the helicopter is Ron DiCerio, president of Norcross Helicopters.
Usually we're here about a half hour to 45 minutes earlier every morning. I flight check the helicopter, take it outside, make sure it's airworthy and ready to fly. We then call for our clearances. We have special clearances to fly in and around Rochester. Once we get our clearance approvals and our transponder codes, we're over to the tower. We raise up and then start our routing, which usually takes about an hour and 40 minutes. And we fly all the expressways and any areas that we hear are problem areas or any areas that we see are problem areas. We're on with radar all the time. We're either monitored by radar, departure control, or traffic, and we call clearance across runway 22, runway 422, across runway 28, So anytime we are coming across any flight path into one of the runways, we have to get a clearance to cross. There are times when we're put on a holding pattern, and there are times when we cannot cross that runway. But I'm on constant radio with the tower, so that we just can't fly where we want. We have to get permission to fly in the areas we fly.
Expect some slower speeds on the roadways this morning, and already there's a moderate to heavier traffic volume through the Can of Worms area. Now at around 441, there's some slow speeds. East Avenue and Elmwood Avenue is a little bit slow, but over on the east side here, where there's an occasional snow squall, we are finding road conditions to be much improved over what they were yesterday. Downtown Rochester appears okay, and Captain Friendly and the Johnny Antonelli Firestone Courtesy Cruiser just ran across a vehicle spun out on Route 390 in the southbound direction between Ridgeway and Lexington. The vehicle's in the center median at this time. The traffic speeds are slow, and there's snow squalls over in that area as well, so expect some slow speeds and give yourself a good extra 15 minutes of traveling time and extra braking room on the roadways too. Buckle up on the way in. For Rochester Tel Mobile Communications, this is Gary Chard in the WVOR Traffic Copter.
A long time ago, working with WVOR, Mr. Jack Palvino and I had sat down. We had an agreement, and we did it verbally without contract. We decided that we were going to try an aerial survey, and if the survey continued to work, that we would continue the survey for as long as it had an interest and an impact. And that's 10 years ago. In March, we'll have 10 years in aerial traffic reporting.
I asked Gary Chard how he became Gare in the Air.
Well, it's a funny question. It's kind of a long story, but basically I was a police officer at the time. And while I was a police officer, the management at VOR had changed, and they were looking for someone who had knowledge of the roadways to report traffic conditions from a helicopter. It was a new thing to Rochester. So I interviewed along with several other people and ended up with the opportunity to do it, and have had it for just about 10 years now. I gave up the police force about 3 years ago. I just needed an opportunity to expand what I was doing professionally, so I moved on to doing work similar to what you're doing for the city of Rochester. I was a telecommunications officer there for a few years before going into my current endeavor. Currently, I'm working with people to help secure their financial futures. I'm doing financial planning and financial advisement work with the Central Financial Group out of Midtown. People like the direct communication from helicopter to them. They feel that they're getting firsthand observation, firsthand information, and as a result of that, find it to be highly reliable. Then, of course, occasionally I'll goof up. I'll miss something that'll happen just after we go by or while we're on the other side of the city, and I won't have an update immediately about that. But when that happens, then we try to correct it. We do have a ground link. We have our Captain Friendly cruising around in the courtesy cruiser, and so he'll fill me in a little bit on what he's experiencing on the roadways, and then it helps us monitor what's going on from the air. I think we have a large enough listening audience of commuters and people while they're still home prior to commuting that if we put out a report that there's a specific problem in an area and we're looking to use alternate routes, we're noticing an increased traffic volume. And while we're not the only ones doing that, I think we have a large enough impact that people recognize and use the information from the reports to their benefit.
Most of the time, Ron and Gary are able to go up in the morning, but once in a while it simply isn't safe to fly in the helicopter due to bad weather.
We lose very few days. We probably realistically only lose about maybe 3 to 5 days a year because of weather. One of the days that we would lose would be a freezing rain. Not many aircraft like flying in freezing rain, and a helicopter likes it even less. So if we have a freezing rain, we won't fly. Most of the time, I don't think we've ever been down because of winds, and I really don't think we've been down because of snow unless it's been a really bad storm. But we may average 3 to 5 days, and usually our show rate is about 96% of the time.
I do them by telephone, and I generally do my research through local police agencies, find out what the road conditions are as they see it, and then use that as my resource for putting my reports together. That, my own experience, helps me formulate a report that's relatively accurate.
Although Gary would use ground research when the helicopter can't fly, he feels that using the helicopter helps him give better road reports.
It's been my experience to this point that visual observation of what's going on versus interpreting something that someone else has already interpreted and tried to communicate is clearer and cleaner because I'm reporting exactly what I see, and having driven the roads, I've experienced some of those slowdowns, and I try to interpret them most directly for the individuals that are listening.
But what about the poor guy who's already stuck in that mess?
I get a lot of that. The best we can do really is to offer alternate routes and hope that people are listening regularly enough to catch the information as it progresses through the morning.
Ron DiCerio has had a lot of experience as a pilot.
I started in aviation and fixed wing, and then as I flew fixed wing, generated interest in helicopters a number of years ago, and decided that I wanted to end up as a helicopter pilot, and worked on that rating and accomplished it through a number of years and experience. Cross actually is my corporation. It's a corporation that we developed, and we developed it for the aviation portion. And Norcross Helicopters is part of one of our divisions, a spin-off of our construction company. We do flight training, we do power line patrol, pipeline patrol. We have some fun with our flight department also. We do some unique jobs like commercials, filming commercials, following trucks, following trains. We do commercials for larger organizations sometimes that are shown. I did one for Cinemax where balloons were ascending one time about 3 or 4 years ago, which was fun, chasing some balloons and getting a Cinemax commercial when it first started. But we do a number of different things. We're in our charter service, we're 135 service. So we can do anything from flight training to commercial operations to transportation to aerials to power line, pipe, gas line, a number of different things.
Aviation Highlights is a monthly TV program about aviation in and around the Rochester area. It comes to you monthly right here on cable channel 12. And if you'd like to see the November edition of Aviation Highlights, here's how. Each episode plays at least twice on cable channel 12 in the city of Rochester and in a number of the suburban towns. Here is a list of when you will be able to watch next month's episode of Aviation Highlights in this viewing area. That wraps up our October edition of Aviation Highlights. I'm Paul Pakusch, hoping you'll join us again in November for another edition of Aviation Highlights. Portions of Aviation Highlights were made possible by a donation from Dynamic Recording Studio and by Rillo Associates, a full-service advertising and public relations agency, and also by Denair Incorporated,